One.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the August 10th, 2022 meeting of the Board of Appeals on the application of 16 Amer Road LLC to do a 40B development at 16 Amer Road in Milton, Massachusetts. My name is John Leonard. I'm chairman of the Board of Appeals. With me this evening are my two fellow board members, Brian Conley and Giselle Joffer. This is probably a 7th, 8th, or 9th hearing on this matter. The applicant is being represented by attorney Jesse Schomer of Regnante Stereo LLP. And I guess the preferred way is just to indicate that we've received a lot of filings in early August from the applicant and the applicant's experts, as well as materials from Mr. Corcoran and Mr. Corcoran's expert witnesses this evening. All of those materials have been posted on the website of the Board of Appeals, so everyone's had at least, I think at least a week or more to review these materials and be prepared for this evening's meeting. So let me begin by welcoming everyone to this Board of Appeals meeting and asking Mr. Schomer, do you want to proceed, Mr. Schomer, with a short or at least concise delineation of where you are, how the project's evolved, and what evidence, if any, you're going to be presenting tonight. And I also understand that Mr. Zawinski, on behalf of the town of Milton, may have evidence to present, and certainly Mr. Corcoran is here with his two expert witnesses. So, Mr. Schomer, what's your pleasure?
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mr. Chair. For the record, attorney Jesse Schomer representing the applicant tonight. With me tonight, Mr. Chair, are my client, Joe Tamposi, who has a few remarks that he'd like to make regarding some recent meetings that we had with neighbors, as well as attorney Corcoran's consultants who are on the line tonight as well. Also representing the applicant tonight, Mr. Chair, are Tim Laranger and Jillian Tomaselli of Embark Architecture. They're here to present the additional materials that were submitted to the board last week in response to some requests for additional information. And also present on the line tonight, Mr. Chair, is Natalie Adams of Verdant Landscape Architecture, and she's here to present the updated landscape plans. If I may, just very briefly, because I know that there are a number of items that we need to get through tonight, and I see that it looks like Ms. Fernandez, the town engineer, is on the line tonight. So Tim may wish to go to her first, so we don't keep her too late. And I'll defer to your preference and Tim's on that, and also whether to go to the peer review consultants first before we go through our materials. But just in brief, Mr. Chair, since we were last together 3 weeks ago, we have had an opportunity to have 2 meetings with the neighbors to the rear and side of the site, and Joe will talk about that in just a moment. We've also met last Monday with Attorney Corcoran's consultants, and I'm sure we'll be discussing that meeting later tonight as well. As you mentioned, Mr. Chair, last week we also did file updated landscape architecture materials, which were intended to address several points of information that were requested, including more details for the planting list and schedule, foundation plantings, the trees at the rear of the site, fence details, and screening for the transformer. And Natalie will talk about that in a few minutes. And also, Mr. Chair, was the additional architecture materials, which were intended to provide some rendered views of the site as was requested by the board. And also, I would note by the planning board in their recent letter, which we did have an opportunity to review. And we appreciate Tim Serwinski sending that to us. Also shown in the updated architecture materials, Mr. Chair, are the proposed mailroom, a shadow study updated for the revised building and massing and location on the site, as well as some additional site section views that were also provided. So with that, Mr. Chair, I won't steal my team's thunder. I'll let them present their plans on their own. But I'll pause at this point to ask if the board would prefer to have us go first or hear from Town Engineer Fernandez or your peer review consultants.
Let me then start out by asking Mr. Sawinski, do you want to present Mrs. Fernandez's testimony at the present time, Tim, or do you prefer to follow the presentation of the applicant?
I think if it's all right with the board, if Ms. Fernandez can just present, she issued a comment letter earlier today based on her review of the most recent materials and Sean Reardon's most recent peer review report. So I think it'd be good to give her an opportunity to do that, and if she can be dismissed earlier rather than later, we always appreciate that. So if it's okay with the board, I think that would be the right way to go.
Okay, then that sounds like the preferred way of doing it. So Ms. Fernandez, welcome to the Board of Appeals, and we're delighted to hear from you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, everybody. I had the opportunity to review the plans that were submitted on July 13 by the applicant, as well as the peer review comment letter number 2 by Tetra Tech. The comments I provided, and I'm sorry, but they were provided today. You all may not have had the chance to review it yet. Are very simple and straightforward. They are related to mostly our utilities, the water system, and fire protection. Pretty straightforward comments. Couple of the main points are that the water system, the proposed 8-inch water main going into the project site shall remain privately owned. So will be the sewer, if the applicant has any questions about that. In regards to the multiple, and this has already been brought up by our peer reviewer, because there are so many trenches that will be required along Amor Road. We will be asking for a full width mill and overlay once the applicant submits the filed permits associated with the engineering permits associated with construction of the site. So just kind of wanted to state that. I stated that in the letter, so it was no surprise to anyone. Also, just want to remind the board that we will be requiring a snow management plan to be submitted for review before we can move forward with the building permit approval. There's still question as to whether or not the snow area is sufficient during certain snowstorm. It may require the applicant to make provisions for removal of off-site removal of the snow, depending on the size of the storm. So it's not to be pushed into other people's property or the right of way. The other thing that I would like to bring the attention to the board and the applicant in the letter is that sidewalks shall be ADA compliant on the town of right away. So the sidewalks around the site, make sure that all the ramps are compliant and that plates are installed at crossings. I did not see those installations in the drawings that were submitted, and just that the plates shall be specified as color brick red, which is the town of Milton standard for those plates. Other than that, I have no further comments.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ms. Fernandez. Let me ask you, Mr. Schomer, do you have any questions that you want to pose to Ms. Fernandez?
I don't believe so, Mr. Chair. Our engineer, Phil, is on the line, and if he has any questions, he can let me know.
No, Phil Cordero from Allen Major. Jesse, we're all set. We're aware of those comments, and we'll provide the future information as the city engineer has requested. Town engineer.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me ask Mr. Corcoran, do you have any questions of Ms. Fernandez?
I don't have any at this time. We have not had a chance to review her comment letter, and I would ask if we have any specific comments to that, John Chessie will provide those back to the board in time for the next hearing.
Okay, great. That's very reasonable. Mr. Connolly, do you have any questions of Ms. Fernandez?
None of Ms. Fernandez. Thanks for your comment letter. Maybe just for Attorney Schomer and his team, are you still reviewing the comment letter, or have you had a chance to look at it and have you concluded that you can accept all of the conditions?
To answer your question, Mr. Connolly, I was not aware that the letter had been filed until just now, actually. Yeah. So subject to review, everything that Town Engineer Fernandez said sounded perfectly reasonable to me, and I believe we were in agreement with all of it. But we'll confirm that definitively by the next hearing.
Okay, great, thank you.
And just if I may, before I forget, on the point that Engineer Fernandez raised about snow removal, something that we've discussed previously at hearings is adopting a condition requiring the removal offsite of snow in the event of heavy snowfall. So that's something we're looking into and will be incorporated in the final decision. So we're certainly in agreement with that.
Great, thanks, Mr. Schomer. Let me ask Giselle Joffer, do you have any questions of Ms. Fernandez?
Thank you. I don't have any questions. Thank you, Ms. Fernandez, for your clear commentary.
Great. Thank you very much. And let me just be sure, Tim, do you have any follow-up questions with Ms. Fernandez?
No, I do not.
Okay, great. Giselle, is there anybody out there who has their hand raised that may have a question of Ms. Fernandez? I guess the answer to that is no. And let me also just, for the sake of caution, I did see Sean Reardon's face appear somewhere mysteriously at the beginning of this hearing. Sean, do you have any questions or comments regarding Ms. Fernandez's testimony?
No, I think it's completely consistent with what we noted in our letter, and I agree with her completely.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'm not sure Cliff Ballmer is here. I haven't seen him yet, but
I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Good to see you again, Mr. Ballmer. Do you have any questions you want to pose to Ms. Fernandez?
No, I don't. I concur with Sean. It's what I expected, I think, and in line with what we've been observing. So.
Okay, that's great. So thank you very much, Ms. Fernandez. We appreciate your being here. We appreciate your comments, and as you can see, they'll be substantially considered and incorporated in the decision if we ever get to write a decision on this particular matter. Mr. Schomer, do you want to have Mr. Tamposi make his remarks at the present time, or do you want to have one of Mr. Loranger or Natalie Adams make their short presentation?
If it's agreeable, Mr. Chair, I'd like to hand it over to Joe just to real briefly go through his conversations with the neighbors, because I was away last week, so I wasn't present for those myself. And the reason why I suggest he going first is because I think that'll be informative to the conversation about the offsite trees and Ms. Adams' presentation on landscaping. So I would propose to go to Mr. Tamposi, followed by Ms. Adams, to go through the landscape, and then followed, Tim will bring up the rear on the architecture.
Great, that's fine. Mr. Tamposi, welcome back to the Board of Appeals. So we're delighted to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, everyone. For the record, I'm Joe Tamposi from 16 Amore Road, LLC. Since the last meeting, we've had several meetings, as Jesse alluded to, with the neighbors and also with Mr. Corcoran and his consultants. So last Monday, we met with Attorney Corcoran, John Chesia, and David Black, and we had a good conversation over Zoom regarding some of their concerns, and I know they've given written comments to those as well. And I feel like we have, answers to the majority of the main concerns, and some of them just require information that at this stage in the process isn't available yet. And then subsequent to that meeting, we met with Evelyn and Aaron Linares. So Natalie Adams, our landscape architect, and I met with them on site. They're the neighbors at 220 Brush Hill Road, which is the direct abutter to the project. to the rear of the site. If you're looking at it on a plan view, it's to the north. I always get a little confused, the real world directions, but directly north of the project if you're looking at the plan view. So they have the longest property line shared with the property. And so Natalie and I met with them to discuss the project and the landscaping plan. And I would say it was a very productive meeting. They had some questions regarding the landscaping, and I would say their primary concerns are privacy and noise, which we certainly understand. And so with respect to the trees that are along that property line, which I know we've had quite a bit of discussion about, and Mr. Corcoran and his consultants have brought up. So the Lennar is actually are happy that we're going to be removing the trees on our side of the property line. And they also indicated that they'd like us to remove some of the trees on their property as well, if we're willing to do so. Their concerns with those trees are, one, they're deciduous trees that are getting older and they're not in the best of health. And they also drop a lot of leaves and branches onto the Linares property, both trees from our property as well as trees that are already on their property. So that was actually one of their concerns, was that we might remove some of those existing trees. And they also are very excited that we're going to be planting evergreen trees. So they prefer the evergreens to the existing deciduous trees because, one, they'll provide better screening, and then secondly, they also won't drop as many leaves and branches as the deciduous trees do. So their concerns were, one, just making sure that we have a dense evergreen screen, which since the last meeting, we've provided additional detail about that. And I won't steal Natalie's thunder, but we've beefed up the size of trees that we're proposing to plant behind the 5-unit townhouse, most adjacent to the Linares' house. So we beefed up the size and the number of those trees, and those will form a very nice screen and an effective screen. And then relative to privacy and noise, obviously we're concerned about that as well. And I just wanted to state for the record that we will have professional property management at this property, and there will be community rules, and there will be quiet hours after certain hours. So we're very aware of the issue, and we want to assure the neighbors who are listening that this will be a well-managed community. All tenants will be screened prior to being allowed to sign leases, and we'll enforce community rules to ensure that both the community itself and the neighborhood as well aren't negatively impacted. So I'd say that summarizes my meeting with the Linares family. Then this morning, I actually spoke on the phone with Debbie, who's the daughter of Mrs. Prendergast, who lives at 28 Amore Road. And a lot of her concerns were very similar with respect to just wanting to understand what the project was going to look like. She had some questions regarding the height of the buildings. So in that respect, we've made efforts to make sure that the buildings are all 2 stories tall. And in addition, the height of the building, relative to the existing building on site will be very similar because we're actually cutting into the grade at the location closest to 28 Amore Road. So that was with respect to the height, and then with respect to the privacy as well, we'll be having fencing along the property line, and then we'll also be having dense evergreen screening in that area as well. So primary concerns are what the project's going to look like, and the landscaping, and making sure that we have dense screening for privacy. And I will repeat again that those are top of mind for us as well. And Natalie can go into greater detail regarding the privacy screening that we're planning on putting in.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Tamposi. We appreciate your comments, and we appreciate you taking the time to personally meet with the neighbors and to address their concerns. Let me ask Sean Reardon, one of our peer reviewers. Do you have any questions of Mr. Tamposi?
Nope, not this time.
Okay, Mr. Ballmar, do you have any questions of Mr. Tamposi?
I do, I think. So I think you said this, but I just want to confirm it. So the current landscape plans that you released last week, did they reflect what you agreed to with the neighbors, or is there another update coming in the landscape plans?
Correct. Yes. So the landscape plans, and Natalie can confirm this, but the landscape plans that have been most recently submitted, I believe were submitted. Jesse, do you know when those were submitted?
It was last Friday, Joe.
Last Friday.
August 3rd.
Yeah, August 3rd.
Or the 5th.
So those plans do reflect what we discussed with the neighbors, the Linares family. And I haven't. I spoke on the phone today with Debbie, who's the daughter of Mrs. Prendergast. So I discussed those plans with her. I'm hoping to meet with her. She's actually from out of town, and she manages the property for her mother, who's elderly. So she's going to be back in town next week, and I'm hoping to meet with her at some time next week. And if there's any other neighbors as well, who would additionally like to meet, I'm certainly more than willing to meet with them as well.
And that was my only question. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Cliff. Appreciate your participation. Mr. Brian Connolly, do you have any questions of Mr. Tamposi?
No, I don't. Thank you for making time to meet with the neighbors. I guess I'm curious I'm actually not clear who Mr. Corcoran's client is, and if it's the neighbors who Mr. Tamposi met with, but just want to understand who are the community stakeholders in addition to the direct abutters, and what we're hearing from other neighbors.
Yeah, that's a fair question, and it's an appropriate question. Ned, do you want to answer that question as to specifically whom do you represent? Is it individual neighbors? Is it a neighborhood association, or just a group of neighbors?
It is a group of neighbors, mostly direct and near abutters. Both Ms. Prendergast and the Linares are part of the group. They reached out to me after the last hearing, requesting an opportunity to meet with particularly Natalie Adams, but also with Mr. Tamposi to discuss issues of screening and the like. And so we made that connection last week. They appreciate the fact that Joe and Natalie took the time to do that. And I know that, and I've heard by email from each that they appreciate the opportunity. I think from what I understand, Joe has fairly accurately represented what was said in those meetings. More broadly, their concerns about the scale of the project remain, but in particular, the opportunity is always a good one to talk about how you might screen impacts, because if they're left with something, they want to get obviously as much as they can in terms of screening and other valuable considerations. So, but I do represent them. A woman named Vesper Barnes, who lives a catty corner across the street. Sandra, just blanking on the De Silva, also 2 houses up. So the pocket of people who live immediately around this property are the people that I represent.
Okay, great. Thanks for your comments, Ned. Other than your comments, do you have any questions of Mr. Tamposi?
No, my only obviously concern is I haven't seen the updated landscape plan. I'm sure if there's any mods to go with that associated with what we learned from Debbie and Ms. Prendergast today, that there's a commitment made to follow up with those with the commitments here, that those are represented in conditions, et cetera, going forward.
Okay, great. Thanks. Thanks, Ned. Let me ask Tim Sawinski, do you have any questions of Mr. Tamposi on behalf of the town of Milton?
Not at the time, sir, no.
Okay, great. Thank you. Mr. Schomer, do you want to offer Natalie Adams as the next witnessing.
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. I think, why don't we go to Natalie?
Great. Ms. Adams, welcome back to the Board of Appeals. We're delighted to hear from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Tim said he was going to present for me. So Tim, are you queuing up the presentation? Here it comes. Thank you, Tim. So we're starting with landscape architecture tonight. This is our updated landscape plan as of August 5th. And I'm going to start right at the drive in the center and work clockwise around so you can all follow me through. Now, as we move through the presentation, we will go through enlargement schemes. So we'll glance over at this. So I'm gonna go through what's labeled here. So at the corner, we have that 24-inch diameter at breast height oak that will remain. We have a 6-foot fence, closed board fence on top of a retaining wall that goes around and skirts around to the stairs. And you'll notice the dumpster enclosure. And I'll just stop right here. There's the pervious patios at the 4-bed duplexes. And we also have screens to screen those areas as well. Back over to the dumpster enclosure. We have the concrete stairs that connects the development to the Brush Hill sidewalk. And we also have a transformer there that we will be coordinating with NSTAR for screening options. They're very strict, but we will coordinate with them as to how we can screen. But what I've done is I've placed a couple of large evergreen shrubs right there, and a deciduous tree there. So, you know, I think when you're going by Brush Hill doing 35, I think the speed limit, I'm not sure how noticeable. It's going to be noticeable for pedestrians. So that's what we have to protect. And then on this side of the site, right there at the 2-bedroom townhouses, we have a series of, and I'll tell you right now, those are white pines right there. And in front of them, I have Aesculus parviflora, which is a bottle brush buckeye, and they get very full, very dense, native. That's really going to screen that area very well. And then we have that 24-inch diameter oak right there that we're protecting. And I've put another white behind that. And again, we pick up that 6-foot closed board fence that goes up the site. And we're going to go to the planting plan. So I'm just going to go through the materials here. 6-foot closed board fence here. And then we get to the little retaining wall here, and you'll notice the grades are on the civil plan, but it's a short wall. I think it goes from 24 to 3 feet. And so we're just putting a 5-foot closed board fence because it's high on the neighbor's side and it's low on our side. So we didn't want to overcome the people on the patios with a tall fence. So it's just 5 foot. And then we round the corner, 6-foot closed board fence at the property line, and we skirt down to the amenity space. And here at the abutter, we have a 6-foot fence, closed board fence there as well. But then when we reach the Amore Road sidewalk, it becomes a picket, an open picket, contemporary style. Right. Oh, and then we have the screens around those patios, and we have the picket fence that closes in that amenity space so that little kids can run around and not have to worry about them running into the parking lot or the street. Thank you. Tim, next page, please. So this one is our full planting plan, and I'm not going to go through it all. I'm going to focus on some of the areas that we're really concerned about. So there is a plant list in this document that all the plants are added up. You can look at that. But what we're going to do is we're going to go to the next page, and we're going to go to the enlargement areas. So I can talk about those areas specifically. So next page, please. Okay, so here's our plant list. Now, down in the bottom left corner at the 5-unit townhouse, the buffer plantings that we have planted there, Ilex opaca, which is labeled as IO, that's going to be installed at 10 to 12 foot height. And these are nice looking trees if you've ever seen them at the nursery. You know, 12-foot height tree is about 4 inches in diameter, and its annual growth rate is anywhere between 12 and 24 inches. So in just a couple of years, we're going to have, 17 feet there. And then we have the Pinus strobus, and this one is a cultivar of the straight species. It's It's a fastigiata, which is, it doesn't get quite as ginormous as that Pinus strobus. It maybe grows to about 30 feet, but we're putting it in at 10 to 12 feet height, and it grows 18 inches a year. So that's a pretty steady grower. And the last, not the last one, but the last larger one is the Thuya occidentalis. And these are 10 to 12 feet installed and 12 inches a year. And let's go on to the next page, Tim, because we start getting into the enlargements. Okay, here we are. Here we are at Brush Hill. And these are some of the plant materials you see at Brush Hill. Right there, that lower right, that Aesculus parviflora, that I've planted all around this site where it'll really fit in. And that does get to be 10 to 12 feet wide and about 7 to 8 feet high. So if you look at Brush Hill, and I just went through these plants, but we have white pines there, we have Aesculus parviflora, we have the Thuya occidentalis sprinkled in there. So we're using layers and layers of screening and buffering, evergreen, and I always like to throw in some deciduous because it gives it a nice texture. And so it's just gonna be quite lovely. Joe Tamposi and I walked the site the other day with the neighbor, and we were just looking at that sidewalk and just being so thankful that we were going to really clean it up really nice. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next page, please. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. Go back to that last one, and let's take a look at that buffer planting right up there in the upper left-hand corner. So what we have, and I've kind of alternated between the Pinus strobus cultivar, and then I've used that with each one. So each one gets that right there. There it is. So it's that white pine, nice buffer. And then I've alternated between using an Ilex opaca or using the Thuya occidentalis. So you get there's going to be a nice little rhythm set up in there. And then right at the right close to the decks right here, I'm planting a Calmia latifolia, and I don't have any pictures here, but everybody knows what a mountain laurel looks like. I mean, they're native to this area, and you can see one in just about everyone's yard, and they're just a beautiful shrub. And I've also added another neat little shrub beside the patios. It's a type of taxus, and it's a native taxus, and that's going to add something for the people who live there. All right, let's go on to the next page now. Taking up too much time. Here's our amenity space and a fun hammock and yard games and a little fire pit. I will say we have a luminaire right there, and that is my troublemaking luminaire. My lighting consultant could not make that work, so I'm going to have to switch it out. It kept giving a little overflow onto the abutters, and we just couldn't make it work. So I'm going to either have to move it or switch it out. I haven't decided yet, but that's a red flag for anyone who's interested. Next page, please. And this is our bike workshop area. I love this idea. And so there's a bike fix-it station in there. We've added some furniture to get people to as a gathering space, and we've got the visitor parking spaces. We've got a nice light there. We've got lights at the bike room. So I think this is going to be really popular. Next page, please. And here we are at the townhouse areas, and we're looking at the materials with this sheet. We're looking at the decks with a screen on the side, so they give people a little bit of privacy between deck to deck. And then that's a image of the closed board fence from our side, from the development side. So, the way people place fences is with the nice side to the neighbors. So the neighbors are going to get the beautiful side of the fence, and this is the side we're going to see. An impervious paving at the private patios and the bike area. So any area you see with that kind of rose-colored paving will be pervious. And I've labeled it on the plan as well. It might not be that exact mix of colors. We're trying to match up with the architecture, but we'll work through it and it will be pervious. Next page, please. And oh, this is the page that talks about the buffer plantings back there. Oh, there's a picture of the Calmia latifolia. Beautiful. It blooms in June. It's just lovely. And we did a lot of buffer plantings at that 5-2-bed townhouse area. And on the other one, we lightened it up a bit. We're using the same materials, but it's a little bit more, it's not as dense. And I was asked specifically to focus on the 5 units there towards Brush Hill. And so the neighbors, you can almost see where the house sits right right where our bike fix station is. So we added 3 of those white pines, and these are straight species. So they're going to get quite full and be a beautiful buffer there. And let's see, yes, and then the kalmias and more of the aesculus, which is the horse bottlebrush buckeye. Yes, thank you. Next page, please. All right, and this page describes the materials at the 4-bed duplexes, and we have the contemporary pickets, we have the Zizerscaping. You know, anytime I get really fussy with the gardens in this development, you'll notice I'm going to use some drought tolerant natives. I'll use some gravel and really try to make it loose and informal. I'm trying to draw off your town. I mean, it's got a little bit of country in it, and so that's what we're looking to do here. Next page, please. And here we are talking about the plants in this area, and the plantings I'm using are, you know, again, all natives. Even that hydrangea quercifolia, that's an oak leaf hydrangea, that is native. The Prunus salata is one that's not native, but I really love it. This I'm planting beside a juniper, and that's going to go right down the center on the left side of the drive aisle, and it's just going to light up with color. And the hydrangea is going on the other side, so you're going to get this wonderful color. Now in the front, I'm planting Amelanchier grandiflora. There it is, Amelanchier. It's on the upper left. So that is those 3 trees, those little, they're small trees. They're out in front of the townhouses. And that's the kind of flowering tree you're going to get there. And I don't want to get into the perennials because that's a little too fussy. But if you're very interested, let me know, and I can put together a sheet of images for that. Next page, please. And here, we're getting close to the end for me now. Here's that closed board fence again. Heights vary, so check the plan, and that contemporary picket. And this is the block wall we decided on. It's by Ready Rock, and we liked it because it had texture. Now, remember, we've got all this screening that's going in front of it, so you're only going to catch a peek of it now and then. And I've put the website there, so if you wanted to see more about that product, you could. I think that's my last page. Oh, the lighting plan's next. Next page, please. Oh, and here's the lighting plan. Now, this was updated this morning, and I asked them to address certain things, especially that one luminaire over there at the amenity space. You can see it's overflowing right now. We have a little bit of light overflow from that parking area. So we're going to ask, we're going to go back and we're going to switch out that luminaire, or we can move it. I'm not sure I would be happy with moving it, but there's certainly other luminaires that provide a house side shield on that side of the property, and we will take care of it. That's all for me. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board.
Well, thanks, Ms. Adams. We appreciate very much. So let me ask my colleagues if they have any questions. Brian Connolly, do you have any questions of Ms. Adams?
Yes. So thank you, first of all, for, further effort you're putting into the plans and for, the explanation you just gave. One thing that I'm interested in is making sure that it's clear what's being committed to. And so the tour that you just gave us and how you described the different plantings and fences, do the plans that are on file with us label the trees and the fences for what you said, or is this still at a conceptual stage, or are there sort of commitments on plans that if they're referenced, and if and then we can confirm are consistent with what the neighbors think, right? So if a neighbor looked at this plan and was to say, yes, that's what I discussed with Mr. Tamposi and I like it. And okay, so we can, your expectation is you're going to be required to comply with whatever final version of the plan comes through the board.
That's right. I mean, I understand your thinking, and these are illustrative plans, and as such, they're a little shiny. And so construction plans are very hard to read. They're black and white, and I always feel like the general public can understand plans more when they've had a little color and a little bit of glitter on them, but everything, all the plants are labeled. There's a plant list on there. It's added up. If you go to the previous page, Tim, please, that is the materials. So all those materials are there. They're labeled, and that's our commitment. As for the imagery, as you go through, we try to capture the best, even the plants. Some of those are full-grown plants, but we try to capture what it will look like, in 15 years, or we try to capture that fence. We want a closed board fence. We want it to be wood. So yes, but that was a very good question.
Thank you. And so does it also say on the plan, this portion of the fence is open picket made of this material, and it's okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a comment, and we addressed it. So yes, it does.
4 foot high open. Okay,
Right,
thank you.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, and then has there been discussion about? I think there's some offsite trees as well. I see at least I suppose 2, right, on this plan.
Right.
So I know one thing we've been trying to understand is so your expectations on how your project is going to impact trees on other property. Is there going to be root cutting, for example? Do you have expectations on what impact you're going to have on your neighbors' trees?
Well, previous plans that we submitted had more impact. This one, I don't really think is going to have, you talk about root trimming and things. We're not going to do any of that. And I think the property line sheet, right, is what we're really concerned about. And that's why we've put, everything's just kind of leaning away from that property line. So we're giving the townhouses, I think there's 10 to 15 feet there. And then that's why we have the amenity space in that corner. And, the parking lot is real light right there. I'm not sure. That's the best answer I have for you right now, that we are really trying not to impact the trees along there. But I do remember Joe Tamposi, when we went to the site visit, he asked the abutter, is there anything that you would like us to help you out? A lot of these trees are struggling because it's a forest environment and they're, failing. So he had asked the abutter, can we remove any of these trees for you? And the man was so grateful. So I don't think he's had a chance to address the direct abutter on Amore Road, but I think he has plans to. So maybe we can answer that better in the future.
That'd be great. I mean, I think what I'm interested in is not so much weighing in on whether a tree stays up and near the border of someone's property or comes down. As you said, it sounds like some of the neighbors might be happy to have some come down. But what I am interested in is if the parties agree on what the outcome should be, that be reflected on the plans, right? Or
Right.
if there's not agreement, that sort of be presented to us, where your neighbors and you are not agreeing on how this should come out.
I understand. Yeah. I think when Joe Tamposi meets with the direct abutter, interacts with his daughter, then I can give you a better answer.
Yeah. Okay.
So we have one side addressed, but the other side hasn't been addressed yet.
Yeah. I mean, where would be ideal to end is a place where there's a plan that reflects what you and your client would like to plant and develop, and is also what the neighbors would like to see, and it's in such detail that there's no confusion later on about what the expectations are. And it sounds like that's what you're working toward.
We are working towards that.
Thank you. And then my last question is the fence in the rear, the north side behind the right townhouses.
Mm-hmm.
Did you say it's a 5-foot fence on top of a 3 to 4 foot wall?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. From the neighbors, from the abutters, the wall isn't a wall at all. It's a wall on our side. And you'll have to look at the civil plan to look at the different wall elevations, because it goes from, a little wall to a wall that's almost 3 feet high. And so And I'm not even sure if the top of wall is level. I haven't really looked that closely at it. So we want to do a 5-foot board fence for the abutters, right? So it's the board fence is for security along that fence line for the abutters to feel more privacy.
Okay. So from the neighbor's viewpoint, it's a 5-foot fence. From your
Right.
resident's point of view, it's a 5-foot fence on top of a 3-foot wall,
Right.
setback
Yeah.
15,
Yeah.
10 feet.
Right. Yeah. And you have to be careful because, when you get above 30 inches, you need 48 inches for a fall height hazard. So, just bringing it up to 5 feet is, it gives a little bit more privacy. But, that's all forest back there. So.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That was very helpful.
Sure.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Giselle Jaffa, do you have any questions of Ms. Adams?
Thank you. I do have a few. Thank you, Ms. Adams, for the presentation. Following along from Mr. Connolly's question, I do think this is a different one. So forgive me if I'm asking you to repeat, but I think Mr. Temposi said that the neighbors had requested that some of their trees be removed and replaced by evergreens.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry to interrupt. They didn't ask for any replacement trees. Well, I was in a meeting and when I was there, they didn't ask for any trees to be planted on their property. Not that I can recall.
Right.
Okay.
So, Ms. Joffer, I can expound on that as well. So we discussed planting trees on our own property and then removing some of the trees that are on the Linares property. But what was discussed was planting trees only on our own property. We didn't discuss planting trees on their property as well. So sort of taking that buffer that's in that corner, expanding it on our property side, but not necessarily planting anything on their property side. If that's something that they're interested in, we could certainly discuss that with them further, but that wasn't discussed at the meeting last week.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. On the other side, with the other abutting neighbor, there appears to be a tree beyond the property line. Is that an existing tree being reflected?
That is, we were asked to do a survey of trees to 10 feet off our property line. It was one of our first meetings we were in with your board. And so I went out and there was, these two trees are the ones that are the most significant. And so that's why they show up on our plan. And I like to include them so that, and there's another one in the corner on the other side there that's just at the property line. And we want to make sure that everyone's aware of them. And so.
Okay. So I'm thinking back to the last hearing, and I remember there were sort of a bunch of trees also shown that were outside of the property line that seemed just as close, but there was some confusion.
Yeah.
Whether they would remain or they were part of the plan or not part of the plan.
Yeah.
So it's
no, I know what you're talking about. Sometimes when we start schematic design and concept design, we're working off an aerial with our concepts. And so we just kind of, it's very cartoonish and we say, this is a forest. And so we just kind of go, okay, it's a forest. And then we start focusing on the site immediately. And so that's what happened. And then we were requested to go out and do the survey within 10 feet of the property line all the way around. And so then things start really becoming more concrete. And so that's the evolution of a design.
Okay. So the trees that are within 10 feet are all reflected on this current plan.
As much as it's hard to believe because of the aerial, but those are I know, you know what? I'm not going to say that. What you just said, I don't think is true. I think I don't think that's true. We have a lot of smaller trees reflected on our survey. I don't like to show, I'm not sure if those are, Tim,
That's more representative.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah.
But to your point, Natalie, I think the point you're trying to make with those other trees is that all existing trees are not equal, right? Some are just not very attractive and not long for this world, whereas others are pretty special. So I would assume the two in the back corner are pretty special. We want to make sure that they're treated as such in the landscape plan.
Yes. Thank you.
And what does that mean? Treated as special?
Well, I'm not sure what Sean meant by it, but here we've got this corner of the site, and I'm planting a white pine, and I've got 3 of those Aesculus parvifloras, and then I'm not sure what those other 2 are, but so we've already got this forest environment on that corner, and we're just kind of trying to buffer the people within our site in that corner and make them have a nice corner. We're aware that there's a forest in that corner that we're cutting into, and so we just want to be apprised of these trees. Let's be careful with them. They'll probably show up on my construction drawings of tree protection. Well, we have a tree protection plan. Yes.
Right. So they're incorporated into your vision.
Yes, into my vision. Yes.
Okay. I get it. Thank you so much. So my second question is about plant care and the timing of planting. And what prompts this question is me driving around town this summer. It's a very dry summer, and a lot of new plantings looking dead, obviously not related to this project, but on other projects. And so what in terms of ensuring sort of the viability of all these different types?
Yeah, that's another great question. And not only are the new plantings struggling, I've seen mature trees that are flagging right now. Everybody's struggling, but we have an irrigation. These will be irrigated. These plants will be irrigated from day one. And the management company, that's part of managing the property, will be taking care of the whole property, not just the architecture. The trees and the landscape are very expensive, and they will be cared for, and they won't be allowed to struggle with a desolate summer like we're having.
And the irrigation system, that's sort of reflected in the plans?
It's not reflected in these. I don't think I've put irrigation in these plans, but it's part of things that come out of our office. Irrigation is part of it. Because, I won't get into the details, but irrigation is part of the plans. If you would like us to put that into this submission, we can do that.
No, in some plan somewhere, so that we
understand. Okay.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Finally, this, I will admit, is somewhat trivial, but every time you say it, it pops to mind.
Okay.
A hammock. Is that something that some people will actually use on a property like that?
I know. Well, what I was thinking was, first of all, it's they're actually very popular right now. There's a hammock park in Philadelphia, and what people do is I think there's actual hammocks in the park, and and it's very popular, and so it's been kind of circulating around the landscape architecture profession. And then secondly, there's a couple parks in Somerville. We're doing a park in Somerville, and the community insisted on these bring your own hammock stations. So all you do is install these poles at like 15 feet apart, and people bring their own hammocks, and then they hang out in their hammocks. So I thought, well, here we are. We've got a lot of people, not a lot of space, but we do have some nice space. What can we put there where people will go and enjoy it? And so that was what I'm proposing. Although I've heard from people around that the emails that 2 people could never enjoy a single hammock. So, but
curious, but I wasn't aware of the hammock
Yeah, it's a
Wait.
thing right now.
Thank you very much, Ms. Adams.
You're welcome.
Tim Zawinski, do you have any questions of Ms. Adams?
No, I don't. I am though heartened to hear the applicant's commitment to property maintenance. As I was just away on vacation last week, and a lot of my plants are not doing so good. I think that's going to be a really important component of this. It's an impressive planting plan. I think the screening, especially on the edges, but also the landscape plantings all around really do make a project really nice. And so we'll want to make sure that they're cared for, both with that irrigation infrastructure and that commitment to property management. But otherwise, no questions right now.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Appreciate it very much. Mr. Corcoran, do you have any questions of Ms. Adams?
Questions? Yes, questions and comments. First, I will confirm with my clients when they have a chance to look more carefully at this plan that this is consistent with what they understood. I'll also confirm with them regarding any tree removal, particularly at the 220 Brush Hill Road, if there are any specific trees that they've identified, that we'd want to identify those, obviously, as part of the process. And I have two questions. When I forwarded contact information to Mr. Tamposi, one of the emails, there was an email concerning some fencing. The folks across the street who are not direct abutters, but who live directly across Amor Road would also like fencing and trees to help screen the visibility of this project from their perspective. I'm wondering whether that's something that the team has thought about or is willing to commit to doing.
Yeah, can I ask a question? Are you talking about more on this site? Or are you talking about on their site to protect them?
I'm not sure. I'm talking about on their site across.
Oh, okay. All right. Then I'm sure we'd be open to listening. Yes.
And then separately, I've got a text indicating that Ms. Linares would like to consider fence along the frontage of her property on Brush Hill Road. Undefined, but again, that's something that the team would be willing to consider as well.
I'm going to let Joe Tamposi answer that.
So I think it's something that we can discuss as a team. I would want to look at it a little more closely just to see where exactly is being talked about, and make sure that it relates to this project, in the impact of the project.
Sure. Understood. Thank you.
Do you have any more questions, Ned, or is that it?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, great. Crystal, can you tell us whether there's any persons present who would have their hands raised and may have a question?
There is Vesper. I believe she's one of the neighbors. I'm going to promote her over.
Hi there. This is Natalie Adams, landscape architect. Do you have a question or a comment?
Yes, I have a question and a comment. First comment is with regards to our attorney, Ned Corcoran. I'm the president of the association, and this is something that came up before you came on. And as such, in his capacity, as he's actually representing a neighborhood association, which is duly incorporated, and people from the entire neighborhood are interested in this and are contributing to making sure we have representation. Just wanted to clarify that.
Second, can I stop you for 1 second? Could you just tell us what is the name of the association so we'll have it here?
You would ask me that?
You want to talk to your lawyer?
I do the paperwork.
Okay, well, that's all right. No. Mr. Corcoran can supply that to us at a later date. Why don't you tell me?
I don't want to misstate it because it took a while to figure out the right name. So
that's all right. I'm sorry. I didn't ask that to embarrass you.
Yeah.
ahead.
So
What's your next question?
secondly, my question is with regards to I'm not too good with northeast, south, and west, but the corner where it looks like there's going to be a gathering area. So just on a concern is that where that is really means that all of the people that are looking to entertain and relax are going to sort of emerge on that area, which I have some concerns about because I mean, right now that's a very foresty area. And I mean, your comments about it being sort of a foresty neighborhood is why we like it. Most of us on Amo Road have 1 acre and all of our property, our houses are surrounded by mature trees. And that's one of the beautiful parts. So your schematic appears to, it looks like they're mature trees now, but between the time that you put this up and the trees actually look that way, it's going to be quite a bit of time. And again, as the president of the Neighborhood Association, we continue to be concerned about the extreme density of this project, 16 units on an acre. Because when you look at it, looks like, okay, it looks like it should be 5 acres of land to try to put this much housing on and then put in this many trees. And I just see that schematically that it works.
Well, I like to show the trees at Midland age. So some of these street trees that I've proposed are probably going to get even larger than I'm showing them. So I'm showing them at probably about 10 to 12 years old. You will see significant growth in 7 years. 7 years, and some of these trees could be 35 feet tall. And we did put that amenity space in that corner because we wanted to give the neighbor a little buffer room, so a little breathing space. And we also wanted an open space for people to go outside and enjoy this this beautiful environment. So I don't really foresee it being a party place. You know, Mr. Tim Posey has assured us that they're going to be screening people, and he talked one point about himself living in one of these communities, and he said it was very quiet. There was just a bunch of, 30-something people that worked all day and then came home and watched TV. So I know I didn't answer your question correctly, but do you have another question or comment?
The concern is about a fire pit, and I just have, I'm hoping that can be taken out of the plan altogether. Because although it's very sexy and sort of the popular thing to do, I personally think they're very dangerous, and this is very close to my house. So I'm not whether I mean, maybe one that has little pebbles might work, but an actual open fire with wood.
No, this isn't open fire with wood. These are we haven't specified it yet, but these are gas fired. That's a gas fire. That's what I spec on all my plans. I don't use open fire. But it's your comment is noted, and we will, we'll talk to the team about what they want to include.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you for your questions. We appreciate that very much. Mr. Schomer, do we have?
We do. Next up for us, Mr. Chair, is Tim Loranger of Embark Architecture. Thank you, Natalie, for your presentation. Appreciate it.
Actually, Jesse, could I ask a quick question?
Of course you can. Go ahead.
I'm just curious as to how you anticipate the gate from the meeting area to Amo Road. Like, is that going to be locked all the time? Is that going to be a free-flowing gate? How do you anticipate that being used?
I did not anticipate it to be locked. It's not, there's no pool in that area, and the rest of the space is very open. You know, I mean, it's not a gated community. So I wouldn't imagine it would have a key fob or anything like that. What I would say is that it would be child-proof. So a toddler couldn't walk over to it and open it. It's got to be a latch like that. So it's got to be toddler-proof, you know, but that's what I would say to that comment.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Adams. We appreciate it. Tim Loranger, welcome back to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I begin, I see that Mr. Bomer and Mr. Camposi both have their hands raised. I don't know if they want to comment on something before we move on.
Great, I can't see that on my screen. Mr. Palmer, go ahead.
Yeah, I do have a couple of questions. Let me lower that distracting hand. Thank you very much for that presentation. I do have a series of questions and then just kind of design comments that I would bring up because the team has been very responsive. So I'll maybe edge over the line a tiny bit. But I think probably most importantly for me, you clarified a couple things. One is a very small detail, which was on the drawings that I got and reviewed, that plant list did say probable plant list. What you showed tonight removed that word probable. So I appreciate that because I was sensitive to whether that was a commitment or not. So I would just note that any revised plans need to be submitted. And I think that is going in the right direction. Another quick comment is you mentioned re-looking at the photometric diagram, and I thought also there was some trespass on the townhouse side as well. You mentioned, we're going to say planned east side since the site's at a diagonal. I thought there was some trespass on the other side too. If you could look at that as well, if you're going to be revisiting.
Okay. Okay. Okay, will do. Yes.
And I think probably the thing that I'm a little bit concerned about is that on the civil plans, it's about the walkway. I think the 5-foot concrete walkway along Ammer Road is the right idea, but the civil plan, at least the version that I have, which I thought was the most recent, shows that improvement ending right at the corner. And the landscape plan annotates a new concrete sidewalk along around 140, 150 feet along Brush Hill. Certainly, I think that is a better idea. I would just want to point that out, that at least in my documents, it's inconsistent. And the condition of that sidewalk along Brush Hill is marginal, I would say. And I think it's a very narrow walkway. So I'm hoping that improved broader concrete sidewalk could span across that frontage. I don't expect any commitments now, but it's an observation of an inconsistency.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you. We will we'll tighten that up. Thank you very much.
Other points, I think to Ms. Joffrey's comments that was on my list as well. I think most construction specifications that the architect would issue would require the contractor to maintain the plants for at least a year, but I do strongly support ongoing maintenance. I don't think there's a lot of value in people fantasizing about trees growing at 2 feet a year if they're not going to be properly maintained. So an ongoing maintenance plan, I think, would be a wonderful commitment. I support the idea very much, as was mentioned just now, about the gas-fired fire pit as opposed to people throwing old fence boards on it or something. That is a good point. And then just and I appreciate the retaining wall. I assume that retaining wall type is a decision. It's not probable because I support the choice of that. I think it's the right choice. And I hope that's what you're really going to do. And then the last site comment, I have a couple minor architectural, but I'll wait my turn for that. One comment you made that I've seen go many ways, and you've established at least a dialogue with the neighbors. I've really never taken it for granted about fence orientation, whether the neighbor sees the structure or the owner sees the structure.
Oh, really?
I've never seen that go the same. Well, I have seen it go the same way, 50 chance, but it's always a guess. Most zoning codes do say the owner should see the structure, but it's not always the case. And then my last design related comment is something that I've seen done in kind of intimate scales like this, where you have a sort of parking court, because I'm imagining that those parking spaces, there are so few units, that will be space that actually residents will use as well. You know, kids who kick balls around or whatever. One enhancement that I've seen, and Mr. Reardon may not agree with me as a civil peer reviewer, but sometimes delineating the parking spaces with pervious paving, you know, delineating it with a small stone curb or something that breaks up the width of it, is certainly a visual enhancement and potentially has some environmental advantages.
Yeah, I like that. That's noted. We'll talk to the team about it. I love the idea of kids playing in parking lots, but I can't talk about it because a lot of people don't agree with it. But, you know, I mean, the traffic comes in, it stops. You know, the kids are smart enough that, but you just can't talk about.
No, I understand. Yeah. It's not the official space, but if you balls kicked around in that space. And that's all I have on response to Natalie's presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bowman. Appreciate very much. Tim, do you want to pick it up, please, from Embark Architects?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So let me get to the architecture here.
Tim, do you mind if I just cut in ahead of you?
Go for it.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, I just wanted to address one of Ms. Gibbs Barnes' questions.
Fine, please go ahead.
Sure. So just regarding the shared amenity space in the corner, one, I think, you know, Natalie's correct. That will be a gas fireplace, not a, you know, wood burning. And then secondly, each of the units does have its own private outdoor space, which I think, you know, as far as sort of, you know, most day-to-day informal gatherings, that'll happen for each unit's private space. You know, that was a key component for our design team to make sure that, you know, the duplexes had very generous sized private patios. And then each of the townhouse units also has its own deck or patio. So, you know, it's not expected that you know, the shared open space is going to be, you know, constantly huge parties of people and big groups and, you know, loud, making noise. You know, that's going to be, you know, a quieter, you know, lesser used area. And, you know, certainly we'll have community rules and regulations, as we've said, you know, limiting noise and limiting, you know, any sort of obnoxious activities.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Tamposi. Tim Loringer, do you want to pick up the ball?
I'm ready.
Good. Quick,
So,
start talking quickly before you shut down again. Go ahead, Tim.
So we have a few slides that add a couple kind of supplemental graphics that were asked for at the last hearing, and then a couple of small tweaks to plans that we can review. So starting here, we put together a kind of series of kind of rendered collage elevations of the streetscapes themselves along both Amber Road and Brush Hill Road. So they kind of help. There were some questions about how the plantings relate to the architecture and how the architecture relates to ground materials. So I thought this was like a really nice way to illustrate that for everyone. So we're starting here, we're kind of on the east end of Amber Road. So the property line here is where you can kind of see the closed board fence extending kind of to the north, and then that 4-foot picket fence along the front here where we have that the open space with the deciduous trees in the front between the fence and the sidewalk. And then as you get over to the townhouse, the duplex units themselves, we're actually stepping the slab at these two units. So each of the units is basically there'll be a small step up, but there is essentially a kind of flush entry condition. And then you can see the perennials that Natalie was referring to kind of beneath the windows at these two units that kind of shield how the building meets the ground there, with some of those flowering small trees kind of add each unit itself to just add another level of kind of visual interest and buffering. And then here's just, again, those kind of examples of what that closed board fence and the picket fence look like. And then stepping a little bit further along the road, you can see we're treating the kind of front of the other duplex similarly. This one, because the grade is dropping off as we kind of get to the west end of the site here, is where we have where the floor slab of the unit itself is much higher than the grade. We're not going to have an exposed foundation here. We're going to extend the material to the ground, so it just looks like a slightly taller unit, but it doesn't actually see the foundation. The steps themselves, which are very minimal at the kind of unit on the right here, and a little bit more pronounced on the unit to the left, are going to be a kind of parged concrete, which is just a way of giving like a nice finish coating that looks kind of clean and modern. It doesn't look like it's like a cast concrete. Here's just kind of an example of what that would look like here. Again, just perennial plantings beneath the windows, the flowering tree. And then as you get to the corner here, we have that large existing kind of 24-inch oak. And then the additional kind of low ground plantings and a few deciduous trees that we're starting to collage in here to give you an idea of what that would look like. You can also see the what would be visible in terms of the height of the retaining wall here. It's about 5 feet tall, and then the 6-foot closed board fence on top of that, and how that relates to the kind of the scale of the units and the scale of the vegetation. And then wrapping around the corner here on the Brush Hill Road side, again, here is what you would see of that retaining wall of the block wall, which is showing another image here of what the texture material is, with the fence on top of that is, again. And then the siding material of the duplex unit coming straight to the ground. So this would be kind of a lawn area with the combination of deciduous trees with to kind of buffer up higher with the white pines that in the other plantings that Allie was discussing, kind of that would really, as she had noted, shield the retaining wall itself. It wouldn't be particularly visible. We are representing the transformer here, and we will work with the utility company on what we can do to screen that. They are pretty strict about access to that. And then at the end of the townhouse here, we'll continue that kind of parged concrete look that will kind of that's also how we're treating the staircase here, and that will wrap around the corner here. But that will also be shielded by some pretty intensive plantings there. And you see that second kind of larger oak we're keeping in this corner. So that's we just wanted to kind of represent more graphically and visually than just the plan of what those plantings would look like as kind of accurately as we could. So then moving on back to the site plan itself, we are showing kind of diagrammatically the extent of the picket fence in this kind of purple color versus the closed board fence in the red color. And Natalie can kind of, she went through that pretty thoroughly, so I won't repeat that. I do want to touch upon a question came up about how the fence relates to the height of the wall here. I do have the numbers on exactly how high the wall is as you kind of step along it, but I can go over here. So at the very west end, the wall is only about 5 inches tall. Where you see this line here is pretty much the highest point. So it's going to go from here, it slopes upward because we're sloping at a 5% grade along the sidewalk here. So each one of these townhouses only steps up 9 inches slab to slab. But you can kind of see from the topo here, from the contour lines here at the top, how there's kind of like a bit of a knoll here at this back corner of the site in the existing topography. So it slopes up pretty quickly from where my cursor is here till about this point, and then kind of levels off. So the wall itself is only about 5 inches here. It gets to the tallest it is 3.9 feet, so just under 4 feet, right about here. And then it starts to go down again. This is all in relation to the patios themselves to the wall. So it goes from kind of 3.9 here to just 3 inches about here, and then you're below 3 feet kind of for this run of the wall. And then by the time you get to the corner, you're only at about 1.5 feet again. So it's not a consistent like 4-foot wall, the whole thing. And the idea of having the 5-foot fence is just it's not really needed for screening at that point because you have a bit of the wall doing that. It's just kind of continue from the neighbor's perspective. It kind of keeps a consistent height for the top of that wall. kind of on the full length of the property line from their point of view. But we really don't need the 5 feet to screen it from our side. And in terms of how that would kind of feel from, and I have some sections kind of next few slides we can go over, but there is 16 feet of distance between the rear of the townhouses and that fence. So it's not as cavernous as it sounds to have a 5-foot fence on top of a 3-foot wall. The other thing I want to point out on the plan here is the addition of the mailroom adjacent to the bike storage, kind of in that central location on the site. So very easy to access for delivery trucks for all the residents. And then it's incorporated into the architecture of the townhouses themselves and into the roof structure of that bike storage shed already. So it's not like an additional kind of massing that pokes off. We've kind of incorporated it into the architecture. So moving on from here. One thing that Mr. Bowman had mentioned or requested, I believe, at the last hearing, we had previously, if you take a look at where the section line is cut, we had previously, the cross section we showed previously was cut kind of where my cursor is showing here, kind of at the midpoint between the two townhouses, which is basically where we're even with the existing topography. So everything to the east of that starts to cut into the topography. Everything to the west starts to kind of be above it, which we're building up at that point. So we cut 2 sections, one through each group of townhouses that kind of better represent what's happening at those townhouses. So you can see here, the existing grade that's about 49, just under 50 feet. And our floor slab for that second townhouse is at 53.5 feet. The first one's at 53 feet. So this is the highest those decks are going to be. It's about 4 feet. As you move kind of further east, the townhouses kind of, the end townhouses on that group of 5, so this deck here is only at about 2 feet above the existing grade. So again, as you go west, on the first 2, you're at about 4 feet. And then for the second section, cross section we took, this is through that group of 7, kind of through that midpoint where the wall is at its highest. So the existing grade is about 62 there. We're at about 58 for that patio. So that's where you see that 3 to 4 foot wall in this area, kind of at the center of those townhouses. So as you go kind of further east or west, the wall will get lower. This is the kind of the most extreme example. And then the last thing we wanted to show here was just a series of shadow studies that we've updated that show the new, that represent the new plan. There's not really a change from the original shadow studies that were issued at the original set and presented at the beginning of the year. We haven't gone, the massing hasn't gotten larger, we haven't gotten any taller, but we just want to have an accurate representation. So this is taken on the summer solstice on June 21st, where we have 15 hours of daylight. And this orangish red line here kind of represents the path of the sun. So because you're so far, you get the northeast sunrise and the kind of northwest sunset, with north on the site being in this kind of top left-hand corner here. So your deepest shadows in the morning would be to the east and the west, where there's actually the fewest, there's really no abutter impact because there are no abutter houses in those directions. You have very little southerly impact, pretty much year round. And then to the north at this point in time, very little shadow impact on that side because of the high angle of the sun at this time of year. So our shadows from this group of townhouses that's closer to the butter, 220 Brush Hill, doesn't quite reach the house. And this is representing it with none of the vegetation, none of the fencing either. So it's kind of a true representation of how far the shadows will cast from the buildings. And just for an example, at 1 p.m., because that's the high point with daylight savings, a 30-foot building, which is about the height of these buildings, which isn't even quite true to how far the shadow will cast because that's at the top of the pitch roof. The shadow would only cast they'd only cast a 30-foot tall object, would only cast a shadow of 10-foot length. So you can see that kind of represented here. We don't even get to the property line. And then at the equinox on March 21st and September 21st, you see about kind of sunrise due east, sunrise due west. Again, most of the shadow impact is to the east and the west because of where we have the smallest amount of impact because there are no abundant houses. You have a little bit more shadow impact to the north because of the deeper shadow, 27 feet for a 30-foot building at this point. but still not quite reaching the property at 220 Russia Road even in the later afternoon hours. And then for the winter solstice, because you have a very narrow range of sun path, there is virtually no impact east, south, or west. There is some stronger impact to the north. We have the deeper shadows because of the low sun, but the sun's also not nearly as strong, and basically everything casts a shadow in the winter when the sun has a very low sun angle. But even with that, we're just kind of touching upon the house. You can see the kind of the peaks here of the gables themselves, and how we don't quite reach the majority of the property. And then that is what we have. So I can take some questions now.
Good. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate very much. Let's try Sean Reardon. Sean, do you have any questions of Mr. Loringer?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
How about Cliff Ballmer?
I do, as long as I can make one more comment about landscaping.
Please.
Okay. It's a small thought on the side where the dumpster is. Just a thought that it may make sense to extend that retaining wall further out towards Russia. And this is just another design thought. Extend it a little further out so you could actually have plantings up to higher level to screen the fence a little bit so it doesn't look. I think maybe you could accomplish the same thing with the types of planting that happen at grade. But anyway, it's just a quick thought in looking at this. I do have a couple of comments about the architecture. I think that probably for the most people who would observe the project, I think the idea, I really strongly support the idea of unifying the architecture between the duplex buildings and the townhouse buildings. I think that was a really smart move. I think you probably remember from previous versions, there was a little more differentiation between the front buildings and the rear buildings. I think they have made some efforts to tie those buildings together, which of course it's a small enough development that I think it's much better to read as something with some kind of continuity in the approach or consistency in the approach to the buildings. The scale is really not that different. So the treatment, in my opinion, should be similar. And I think they did do that. I did look at the shadow studies. I think, correct me, Tim, if I'm wrong, but those shadow studies do not include the proposed landscaping.
Correct.
Yeah, so I think that's an important point because a lot of that landscaping is evergreen screening. So I think I will say that this kind of a dynamic shadow study is very useful. I think you really can get a sense from dawn till dusk and looking at these kinds of diagrams. But do take note that the shadow impact, and I think from what I'm hearing, is probably, and I hope the neighbors understand that the shadow studies are really seriously impacted by the screening of the trees. And so what you're seeing here is really if there were no landscaping at all, that's not at all the proposal. So I just want to make that clear to everybody that what you're seeing here is a kind of theoretical model that hasn't been mitigated by the landscaping plan. I think just a couple other quick points. I'm seeing some new images tonight. I really appreciate that. And I hope all of this will be submitted. Whether the last set that was submitted is a very comprehensive set, but we did see some views tonight that help me understand what's actually being proposed. So I'm hoping that either through further coordination of the drawings or submitting these drawings would be a really good thing from my perspective. And one small, really small detail is I appreciate the approach of stepping that siding, avoiding the problem of exposed foundation and insulating exposed foundation and stopping thermal breaks and all the things that we deal with that require extraordinary efforts when there are actually some pretty simple solutions out there, which is just have the siding follow, follow the grade. So I think that's a good move too. I think it helps tie the buildings in to the site. I apologize that my letter only went in yesterday. So, but I will say there were not a huge number of comments from an architectural perspective. I think we all know that through 2 hearings where the board weighed in, as well as 2 very interactive working sessions, we're looking at a very different project than what we looked at initially. And from my perspective, it's advanced in the right direction the whole time. One comment about going back to something Ms. Joffrey said that I forgot to comment on before, and I think Mr. Tamposi addressed it through his kind of behavioral restrictions. It's very easy to put restrictions on the hours that spaces can be used, and if there's concern about neighbors, impact on the neighbors, I think that could be covered in a kind of management handbook. I have one small comment relative to something Sean pointed out, is that picket fence that goes along Hammer Road that delineates the shared green space. That is where I think that's where we're anticipating children would wait for the school bus as well. So there would have to be a gate there, so everybody can get out and hop on their bus when the bus comes there. A small detail, but just wanted to say that. So I think that's all I've got, other than maybe some tiny things in the letter that I think give people a little more time to absorb it.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Ballmer. Appreciate your comments. Brian Connolly, do you have any questions of Mr. Loringer?
Not on Mr. Loringer, but I think for Cliff. So I think when we're here looking at the plans and we're imagining like the resident's perspective, it feels like the front door, right? The view is Amore Road where there's, an attractive patio and landscaping. But I feel like for just observers in the town, there's so much more traffic on Brush Hill Road, car traffic, pedestrian traffic, that I feel like that face of the project is going to be the impression of how people think, is this an attractive development or is this an unattractive development? And I'm just wondering if you think the developer's done, everything reasonable that could be asked between that facade of Townhouse Unit 1 and that facade of Duplex Unit 1 and the retaining wall with the fence on top. And I know we've got plantings, I'm just thinking for a lot of people, the front door of this project's Brush Hill Road, right? And I'm wondering, are you impressed by this view of the project? And is it the impression that you think it should be making on, its primary viewing point?
That is a really, really good point, and thank you for bringing that up. Certainly those end elevations on the first duplex, one closest to Brush Hill, as well as the end elevation on Brush Hill Road of the 5-unit townhouse, that's a really very addressable issue, and it would benefit the residents as well to see some articulation, bays, bay windows, more windows. I think that's a really, really good comment. And I think we saw, we can see one of them. I think in this view, we're seeing the elevation to the right is the end of the duplex building. So that's pretty well fenestrated and there's a lot of mature landscaping, but maybe on the townhouse on the back, could use some more articulation on that end elevation because it's tall and it's sheer. So breaking that up, it could help.
That was one, I guess, impression I had. And then I'm just wondering how that, high wood fence ages over time, right? That's what your eye is going to catch is the fence that surrounds the dumpster and the narrow staircase with the transformer at its foot. I don't know that I, have what the suggestion is, but I think it's worth, we've talked a lot about sort of the functionality of the site, but this view here, I think is what the impression of the project is going to be to a lot of the town. And it's worth seeing what opportunities are just to make it as attractive as possible.
I strongly support that. And I will say in an iterative design process, it often goes that way. You work your way around the buildings. And I agree. I think there's been a lot of attention paid in many other perspectives, but taking this view here and maybe intensifying that a bit is a really good suggestion.
Great. Yeah, thanks. I guess that would be my suggestion to Tim and the developer team to give some consideration to that.
Yeah.
We can continue to look at the design of the two end facades here. And then the kind of the whole picture of how it relates to fence and the retaining wall. Yeah, I do agree that we've kind of viewed the Ammer Road streetscape as kind of the front, as we want to be kind of open to the neighborhood and the closest neighbors, whereas Brush Hill is being the kind of the high traffic highway. You're almost, the majority of people coming through here are going to perceive it kind of at high speeds. And not necessarily like as this is shown here. This is kind of more about scale and stuff. But we can certainly look at that the townhouse elevation here.
Yeah, and I think Tim, when that will come into focus even better is when the leaves drop off of that tree that's in the rent. You're going to see a very large, pretty unadorned elevation on the building.
Yeah, just kind of in design in general, when you have townhouses, they're very front and back oriented. So when you get to that end one, it's always a question of how you want to kind of treat it. So we can kind of continue to look at how the layout of the interior works and how we can maybe get some more windows on the exterior.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Giselle, do you have any questions of Mr. Loringer?
Thank you, Mr. Loringer, for your presentation. I just have one question. It relates to the mailroom, which is now in this version of the design.
Yes.
What are the dimensions?
It's 8 feet wide by 6 feet deep.
Okay.
So it can be used for kind of package storage that can be dropped off and retrieved. And we could also, I think the main purpose of it at the moment, like either way, no matter what we do with the mail, it can be used for kind of central package hub. And whether or not we want individual mailboxes at the units or we want a kind of central mailbox location, we can put that kind of into the end wall as well. So you have like your letterbox, your typical mail, and then we have the actual kind of secure room itself for package storage.
Right.
That's kind of the intention behind it.
It strikes me as small. I mean, I don't know, I'm not a mailroom expert, but I order a lot of packages, which could probably fill up that mailroom. So I don't know. I would love some expert opinion on the practicality of that. Maybe
Well, that's
Mr. Bowman.
an interesting comment. Yeah, I was going to say, Cliff Bowman, do you have any off the cuff comments on the size of the mailroom and whether that is efficient and prudent?
I think it is small. There's no question it's small. Discussion often starts with the post office. So that I know these people need to go talk to the post office and confirm that that's how they want to do it. It's one location, et cetera, et cetera. The boxes are standard USPS boxes. Architects don't have a lot of flexibility in that. So where you do have flexibility is how much space do you leave for packages to be dropped off. I agree it should be looked at. They do have space to make it bigger. And they made, they're also kind of pre-packaged systems where packages can be delivered. They're bigger boxes where packages get put. So I would put that in the realm of design development, but first stop is always the post office, and then make sure that you're comfortable with package storage and then security of the space. So that it at least has a camera in there recording who's coming and going.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Tim Zawinski, do you have any questions of Mr. Loringer? Oh, Tim may be off doing something. So let's.
No. I was just I had my phone in my pocket for a minute. I had to pull it out. No questions right now. Thank you, sir.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tim. Mr. Cochran, do you have any questions of Mr. Loringer?
I guess just one. Following up on the discussion in the mailroom, is there someplace designated here where delivery trucks would actually park so that they would be out of the way and not blocking other vehicles pulling in and out?
There was some discussion in terms of dedicating that number 10 space as a visitor space. So it would be open, not more often than not, as opposed to having it be dedicated to a unit, which would be the most kind of efficient and closest for a driver to jump out and make the deliveries.
That was a comment that came up Mr. Reardon's letter as well, to designate, he said, one, possibly two spaces near the mailroom, so people would be accustomed to using that, and then designate the rest of the spaces for residents.
That obviously effectively reduces the number of spaces that are available for residents and other visitors, but obviously it's an important consideration given the number of units and the potential for significant volume of deliveries taking place. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cochran. Mr. Loringer, you're going to take that into consideration after this hearing, and let's see if you can firm that up a little better and be a little more accommodating to post office purposes.
Mr. Chair, if I could add, this is Attorney Schomer, just to add to what Tim's comments were. The issue of loading and parking management was addressed in the letter that I submitted to the board last week. So I'll refer Attorney Cochran to that letter for a discussion of that. But in a nutshell, what we're proposing to do with respect to loading and guest visitor spaces is to assess the need for whether there's a designated loading space or a designated visitor spaces after occupancy of the project. So at this stage, our preference would be to not formally designate loading spaces or Amazon or rideshare spaces until we assess what the parking demand is going to be, what the guest use of these spaces is going to be, in order to leave ourselves the flexibility to use the site most optimally for the parking with the parking that we have. And if there is a need for a loading space in that space 10 there, or some of the spaces to be specific visitor spaces, then we would assess that after occupancy.
Okay, thank you very much for your comments. Mr. Schomer, are there any other witnesses that you're going to be offering this evening as part of this hearing?
That's it for tonight, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. We appreciate that. Mr. Zawinski, is there any other evidence or witnesses you want to be offering this evening on behalf of the town?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any additional evidence or testimony, but I do want to call everyone's attention to, I had passed around and filed an email that we had gotten from Lieutenant Mark Alba of the Milton Police Department. Lieutenant Alba wasn't available to join us tonight, but I did want to make sure that the Milton Police Department did get a review of the plans and particularly evaluate them and respond to some of the concerns that were brought up in one of Attorney Corcoran's most recent correspondences from a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, raising a few concerns about overflow parking on Amore Road and the potential to sort of affect traffic patterns at that intersection. We thought those were valid concerns and would be of interest to the Milton Police Department. So Lieutenant Alba did file a brief comment letter. I don't have it at my fingertips right now, but I think he did agree that it was an issue of concern and that he would be amenable to, sorry, my little guy is getting ready for bed. He's chasing me around. Apologies for that. But looking into some parking restrictions on that stretch of Amore Road to make sure that we have some signage and some regulations indicating that parking, would not be allowed on the street over there. That's something that the select board would ultimately need to approve with a recommendation from the Traffic Commission. I can't speak for the select board or the Traffic Commission at this point, but I can't imagine that they would not be amenable to putting in some regulations there that ensure the safety of the traffic and circulation pattern. Because there's that extra step of the select board needing to approve that sort of thing, we'll have to work out some language for a condition, in an ultimate decision. I've been talking a little bit with Attorney Schomer about that. But, we do think that that's, could be an effective way to deal with that issue. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that we, Chief Madden of the Milton Fire Department was also not available to join us this week. I think we've been kind of juggling vacation schedules in town hall quite a bit. So we don't have a final comment letter from him, but we will get it and we'll have that in time for the next hearing and hopefully get a chance for Chief Madden to chime in with some oral testimony potentially at the next hearing. So we'll keep after that and I'll keep the board apprised of all of that.
Great. Thank you very much, Tim. Crystal, let me just ask you, I think I neglected to see whether there were any citizens who had their hand raised for questions to Mr. Lawrencia. Are there any such persons present?
There is. It looks like Vesper, she's already here, so she's already promoted.
Okay.
Let me. Oh, she actually took her hand down, so I don't see anybody else.
Okay, that's
okay.
Thank you. Appreciate very much. Just wanted to touch the bases. Mr. Corcoran, do you want to present your witnesses at the present time?
I would. They're here. We filed written testimony. I think I'd start with John Chessie has, I think, a handful of brief comments relative to what he has written, and then a more detailed presentation with David Black concerning traffic and those issues. So John Chessie, first a civil engineer that's representing the neighborhood association with me on this case.
Great. Mr. Chessie, are you?
Hi, thank you.
Welcome.
Right here. Yep. So, I mean, we did have this meeting last Monday, and we talked about a few things. And I think that what the applicant is proposing for a lot of the things that we're interested in would be to sort of push those down the line till after the board's done. And we feel as though some of those issues might be best served with the board in the public meeting venue here would be a better way to address it. And, one of the things is, the retaining wall, maybe it's not very high. It is in cut. There was a picture of a potential look at it. I mean, it seems not an unreasonable request to get a detail and a cross section of what it's going to look like and how it would be constructed and how much room it would take to construct it. Granted, it's not like it's a very, very high wall, but I think that's appropriate at this stage to have some information on both the one along Brush Hill Road and the one near the abutter's property in the corner. I had some issues with the drainage. I went out and I did look at the site, and it does appear that the Amore Road area does sort of drain towards the street and not into the property. It wasn't clear from available topographic data online, but there were a few things that I had raised in my letter. I think for sure there's basically very few test pits underneath either of the systems. There's ledge out there, and I think that that's something that generally you like to have more information on. I know that it's something you could condition, I guess. Obviously, we would look for things first rather than later, but anyway, that's something I think that's worth just thinking about as a board. The construction phase, how that works. I think there's no question in anybody's mind this is a dense development. Even the developers, I'm sure, would admit to that. You have essentially infiltration systems all in the middle of the parking lot with buildings surrounding it. There's not a lot of room to work. They did add a little bit of space with their sort of open amenity space in the corner, but you can't put heavy equipment on an infiltration system. You could compact the soils and then you could ruin its infiltration capacity. And we've asked for a, construction phase plan, and they would like to kick that down the road to maybe the building permit stage. I still think that that's something that the board should have some input on at this phase, where everyone's in the room listening and can understand and ask questions and comment. It doesn't have to be 100%, contractor's going to do it this way, but there should be enough information as to how it's going to be accomplished without impacting everybody in the neighborhood. I think that's not an unreasonable thing for the board to ask. And I think that's mostly what I think I have to offer for tonight.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Jesse. Let me see if our peer reviewers have any comments. Mr. Reardon, do you have any questions or comments?
No, I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. And Mr. Ballmer, questions or comments?
Nope, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Brian Conley, do you have any questions or comments to Mr. Chessier's testimony?
I do not.
How about Giselle Joffre? Do you have any questions of Mr. Chessier?
None from me, thank you.
Okay, Tim, do you have any questions of Mr. Chessier? Tim may be taking his youngster.
No. I'm still here. I don't have any questions.
Okay, great. Then let me see, is there any member of the public who has any questions of Mr. Chessier's testimony?
I don't see anyone with their hand raised right now.
Okay, great. I'm sorry. Okay, so Mr. Chessier, thank you very much for your testimony. Great to have you here. Mr. Corcoran, you have David Black as your next witness.
I do. And we've got, I've expressed general concerns about the density, particularly at this location, a high accident location with sightlines being compromised by potential for parking on street. It's the street is 24 feet wide at the base, at the bottom of the hill, at its intersection with Brush Hill Road, and then it narrows fairly quickly to 20 feet. And if people are parking on one side or the other, that's going to effectively narrow the width to 12 feet or less. And so I think that's a real fundamental issue. I know David's got more particular to speak about that, but I just wanted to highlight that. And then pass it on to David Black with that and other comments.
Great. So thank you, Mr. Corcoran. Mr. Black, welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and I appreciate the opportunity to present to you. I have 2 or 3 areas still of concern that I've detailed them in my written comments submitted, but so I'll just give you an overview, an explanation of what those concerns are. Sometimes it's easier to hear it spoken rather than try and fly through some technical dialogue. I'll start with the parking issue. We're not suggesting, I think, that the number of parking spaces is underparked. I mean, I think there's enough parking here to serve most of the day-to-day needs of this project. I think what we are concerned about is the fact that the site layout and the circulation are very constrained for this amount of development. And I know that Mr. Schumer in his letter, and I believe the architects this evening explained the possibility of allocating 1 or 2 spaces for deliveries, but that I think is fine for an Uber or one of the eat-at-home delivery services or something like that. I'm more concerned about the larger vehicles who will undoubtedly have to park in the drive aisle, the circulation aisle of the project, and potentially obstruct people getting in and out of their parking spaces. Having said that, in reality, I think the net result will be that most of those large vehicles will park on Amor Road. It's a tight site to get in and out of, and I think most drivers of large vehicles will just park on Amor Road, which is an issue because of its width. It's barely 20 feet at the southern end of the site. And I think what comes with that is the likelihood that those drivers, because of the width of Amor Road, will try to pull over onto the grass that is alongside Amor Road and a lot of the frontage. Obviously not where the new sidewalk would be. They would just simply put their wheels up on the sidewalk. And I noticed that there is a suggestion that parking could be restricted, no parking on Amor Road. But I think the issue I see with this is that no parking signs are really not a deterrent if there's no enforcement. And I just don't see practically how the town would enforce no parking on Amor Road. We see this everywhere. The Amazon driver, the UPS driver will arrive in their truck and jump out, and their chances of being ticketed for are just minimal. So that's my sort of feeling on the parking issue. More importantly, I think I'd like to talk about safety a little bit, because this driveway is very close. The proposed driveway is very close to the intersection with Brush Hill Road and the Parkway. It's about 100 feet away. And I do have serious questions about the adequacy of the sightlines that have been presented. I'll come back to that in a little bit more detail, but just in terms of overall safety, there were 14 crashes reported in the traffic impact study. And it struck me that 9 of those accidents involved personal injury. That's nearly 2 out of every 3 crashes at the intersection actually involved personal injury. And looking at Lieutenant Alba's comments, he expressed concern about high speeds on the Parkway and the serious accidents, including, in his words, including bikes and pedestrians. So I think, there may be more information on that in the police department records and the DCR records. The crash analysis is simply based on the Mass DOT website, which we know doesn't capture everything. There's often a lot more information from the local police jurisdiction. So when the original TIA was done back in March 21, this intersection was not listed, not categorized as a HSIP. It's a Highway Safety Improvement Program location, which is a federally funded program which would be administered by Mass DOT and allocated funding for improvements. And the process for that is to perform what's technically called a road safety audit to identify improvements. And the proponent did commit to do that and to implement short-term improvements. Since then, the intersection is no longer classified by Mass DOT as an HSIP location. I want to be very clear, that doesn't in any way mean it has gotten safer. It's simply a matter of ranking of locations and where Mass DOT should allocate funding for improvements. So just because it has slipped off the HSIP list doesn't mean it's a safer intersection. The safety concerns that have been expressed by a lot of people, including myself, still remain. And I think Mr. Schumer has offered, I believe, in his letter that the proponent would do a road safety, would do an investigation of more accidents, such as the police reports. And if they find it was eligible, it was an HSIP location, they would do a road safety audit. I don't know how that would work because the proponent has no means to determine and allocate this or designate this as an HSIP location and make it eligible for funding. But I think my point is really about whether that's the right approach. I just don't think that the availability of funding is a justifiable reason for withdrawing the what I think would be very prudent, which is a proper safety evaluation of this intersection. Now, you could call it a road safety audit. I would just, to distinguish it from the funding issue, I would just call it a safety study to see what improvements could be done, maybe using the same guidelines as we are required to follow in the road safety audit process. So I'm concerned that the offer to do something about safety has been withdrawn for what I don't think is really a justifiable reason. And then finally, I'd like to talk about the sightline, which of course is part and parcel of safety issues. What I want to sort of talk about here is, without getting into too much technical detail, is the TIA has measured speeds on Amor Road, and it's the regulated speed limit is 25 miles per hour, but the study finds that 85th percentile of traffic, that's the speed at which only 15% of vehicles are exceeding, is either 31 or 32 miles per hour, depending what direction you're traveling. And 75% of those vehicles are exceeding the 25 mile per hour limit. So I do think speed is an issue, and it's important because it's upon speed that we determine the requirements for sightlines. The first one we look at is stopping sight distance, which is to ensure that passing traffic on Amor Road can stop. They've time to react and then brake and come to a stop. I think as far as the northbound situation is concerned, I'm not too worried about that particular one. Sorry, that particular one, because although the study identifies 80 feet as being needed, unfortunately, that 80 feet is based on an assumed 15 miles per hour for traffic turning onto Amor Road from the Parkway. And I see no logic for choosing 15 miles per hour. In my opinion, and from visits to the site and being past the site for non-reasons other than my traffic study, that is a very slack, very easy right turn from Truman Parkway into Amor Road. And to me, the assumption that those cars would be traveling at 15 miles per hour is really underestimates the needs. If you based it on the 85th percentile, you would need something closer to 200, over 200 feet. So in my mind, the 80 feet really just doesn't cut it. And then there's the intersection sight distance, which is the distance that a driver emerging from the driveway needs to be able to see to make a safe exit onto Amor Road. Now, the guidelines require that to be at least the stopping sight distance. But that is the bare minimum, because what that does is that allows a driver to stop in time if the person exiting has made a bad decision. The recommended, the desirable intersection sight distance is really what we strive for. I mean, the Mass DOT guidelines specifically say that it's desirable to have a sight line, an intersection sight line that is greater than the minimum. And again, in this situation, the analysis was done using first of all, it was done using the regulatory speed, which does not comply with the AASHTO guidelines. It must be based on the design speed, and typically we don't know what the design speed is. So the recommended practice is to use the 85th percentile speed. But I think, again, setting that aside, the plan that has been provided shows 170 feet being available, which would be okay if it hadn't again been based on this arbitrary 15 mile per hour assumption for traffic turning off the parkway and heading south on Amor Road. So, I mean, I think, to me, good practice, especially when you have a situation where there are concerns about safety at this location, the good practice is to provide as much above the absolute minimum as you possibly can. So the other thing then, just to wrap up on that, is the sight lines are actually shortened here because of the project design. The driveway is very close to the Brush Hill intersection, 100 feet away. If I was designing this site from a traffic safety perspective, I would push the exit from the site as far away from Brush Hill intersection as possible, which would automatically improve the sight lines, because there would be a greater distance between the exiting driver and the driver coming off Truman Parkway. And I know that has big implications for what's being presented tonight, but that just wanted to make it clear that in my mind is a much safer design for traffic. And I'm happy to answer any questions on that.
Great, thank you, Mr. Black. Let's see if we do have any questions. Mr. Reardon, do you have any questions of Mr. Black in this testimony?
Nope, not for now.
Okay, Mr. Ballmer?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Brian Conley, please.
Yeah. So David, do you have sort of recommendations on how you would suggest modifying the project, or do you think it's further study that's needed to respond to your concerns?
Well, I think that I think the elephant in the room here is really the density of this project, and the way to address the circulation and parking issues and servicing issues would obviously be to put less development onto this site. Having said that, regardless of how much development is going on the site, from a safety perspective, I would recommend that the site driveway, the exit, doesn't have to be both the entry and the exit. The exit point would need to be shifted as far south as possible along Amor Road. The entry could remain where it is. That's not the tricky one. In fact, if you had a separate entry and exit, you actually would probably have a much more usable site circulation because you know, a UPS truck might be more likely to, if they're driving to drive through the site as opposed to having to go in and make a reverse T movement to come out again. So I know that this all relates to density and site layout, but that would be my recommendation, Ryan.
That's helpful. One of the things we're wrestling with, and I guess this is driven, no doubt, partly by the density, is also a goal we have for some open space on the site and some play area, which has been accommodated. But I think that that would be in conflict with the exit from the site on the south end of the property, which I think would improve the sight lines. And so, right, so it's interesting. So on the one hand, we could look at it and say we've got to prioritize, although I suppose maybe what you're really saying is if there's less density, we wouldn't have to choose between one or the other. But I think that's, one challenge we would have to think about is our priorities, because I do think we put some value in having some open space for congregation and play on the site, which would, probably be, I think, where you would suggest the exit driveway would go.
Yes, no, I understand that. Or alternatively, put that space somewhere else on the site.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, start with the premise of safe access and plan the site plan around that.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brian. Giselle, do you have any questions of Mr. Black?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Black. With regard to your suggestion of moving the exit as far away from Brush Hill Road as possible, I think that would then place that exiting traffic very close to the abutting neighbor. I just wonder if you have any thoughts on the sort of just the balance there, the disadvantages of doing that, because in the middle, it seems for that particular neighbor to be less of a nuisance.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the neighbors, and it's always would always be a difficult choice for an abutter. Would I prefer traffic exiting the site beside my site, or would I prefer people congregating in the evenings and talking and whatever they do? I have a very similar issue where I live, but I think, stepping back from a professional point of view, clearly I'm going to say that the right decision would be to have the driveway as far away as possible. To me, safety is just a paramount concern.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Giselle. Mr. Schomeyer, do you have any questions of Mr. Black, or do you intend to have your traffic engineer respond to Mr. Black's comments? Where do you generally stand on the issue of traffic and safety of this project?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No questions at this time, and I want to be clear that I'm not a traffic engineer, although I will make a couple of brief remarks, because I did have an opportunity to speak with our traffic consultant before the hearing tonight. He was unfortunately double booked tonight, so he was unable to be with us. But just on a couple of points that Mr. Black raised, and we appreciate his letter. It was helpful, and we appreciate him taking the time to review the project and meet with us last week. On the point of no public street parking along Amor Road, as I've mentioned, and I believe all parties are in agreement that there should be some restrictions if those are approved, and we're certainly willing to go along with that. It's not within our power to control or enforce. That's a Milton Police Department matter. That's a public street. If it's marked as no parking, the police should be ticketing vehicles and ensuring that doesn't happen. So, I frankly, I don't think it's very fair to criticize us for the inability of us to enforce public no parking regulations. But that being said, we're in support of it and would push for that to happen along our site's frontage to ensure that that's not an issue for the project. With respect to the issue of the road safety audit, I want to be clear what we're discussing here, because the reason why MDM Transportation originally recommended and proposed a road safety audit is because the location of that intersection was at the time available for funding. The reason to do a safety audit is because the intersection is eligible for those funds for potential improvements. Their improvements are available only if the road safety audit is performed. So the fact that the intersection is no longer eligible for the funds means that there's no purpose for the road safety audit for the purpose of seeking that funding for the intersection. So that's the reason for MDM's change recommendation. In my letter of last week, what I proposed with respect to this issue was that we would revisit the issue following occupancy of the project to determine if there are additional accidents, God forbid, that have made this intersection to the point where it rises back up to the level of being eligible for this funding. And if that is the case, then the commitment to perform a road safety audit would stand. We would propose that be a condition of approval of the project. With respect to the sightline issue, I also had a chance to speak with our consultant on that, and I can show you, if you'd like, a plan that was prepared by MDM just about an hour before the hearing tonight. But relative to the concern that Mr. Black raised about the travel speed for the intersection sight distance and stopping sight distance of 15 miles per hour, I don't want to misstate what Mr. Black's letter said, but I think it was something along the lines of it was not based on any kind of logic that 15 mile per hour speed was used. That was based on field observations by MDM Transportation. That's where that came from. They observed the site, and that's what they observed. However, after talking with Bob Michaud of MDM Transportation, I posed the question to him, specifically, if we were to assume that vehicles are coming into the site much faster than that, specifically more than twice that speed, 35 miles per hour, would you have the available sight distance to meet AASHTO standards? And the answer to that is yes. If you consult the original traffic study, the sight distances that were shown, they're showing vehicles fairly close to the site, but the area in the intersection is open in a quite significant distance. I believe it's approximately 240 feet. So I'll submit a plan tomorrow for record, Mr. Chair, that demonstrates that significant intersection and stopping sight distance is available. We hope it addresses Mr. Black's concern about the speed of vehicles coming out that intersection. We recognize it's an unusual intersection. It's a tricky intersection, and vehicles travel along that roadway fairly fast and can make that turn fairly fast. But even if that were to occur, the sight distances are available, and we can prove that, and we will. Also, just one final point to make, we've discussed this before, our traffic study also mentioned this. The intersection, we recognize that it's challenging, it's unusual. It is not recognized as an intersection that is a safety concern in this district. It's below average in terms of crash rates. We do acknowledge that in recent history, there was a fatal crash in the vicinity of this area down the street, a block or two, I believe. That's certainly in our mind, and it was in our mind when we designed the project, but it's, we have to design with the reality that we're dealt with here. And the fact is that it is a below average crash rate intersection. It's not eligible for the HSIP funding. And so I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chair. I feel I've made my point. But again, to reiterate, we do appreciate Mr. Black's feedback on this.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Shomer. We appreciate.
Mr. Chairman, could I respond briefly?
Of course you can. We welcome your response. Go ahead.
Mr. Schumer, I want to be very clear. I was not pointing the finger at you are the proponent in terms of responsibility for enforcement. That's obviously well out of your, you can do it inside the site, but not on a public roadway. My point was very simply that putting up the signs is not likely to have the desired effect because the likelihood of the police coming out on a regular basis to enforce it is limited. But I wasn't trying to say that it was your responsibility. On the safety audit thing, I mean, I just, to me, if we only spent our time looking at safety improvements when there was funding available, we would be, I think, it would be irresponsible. I mean, as traffic engineers, our responsibility is to look at improvements where they are. I think perhaps the element here is that the proponent might identify some improvements and would therefore be obliged to pay for them. But that offer was out there in the first place in the original TIA. And then finally, on the sidelines, if we did use the 85th percentile speed and somebody was coming around the corner at 30 miles per hour, you would just about meet the absolute minimum intersection sight distance. But as I said earlier, Mass DOT guidelines and even AASHTO suggest that you should go for there is an intersection sight distance which is much more desirable, and they actually give us the number for it. So again, I will agree that certainly the absolute minimum would be achieved, but given people's concerns generally and the police concerns at this location, I think we can do better than going for the absolute minimum. You know, the reason for the recommended intersection sight distance is so that a driver can make a safe judgment to exit the site safely, as compared to the absolute minimum, the stopping sight distance, which is gives a through driver enough time to brake and not collide with a vehicle that has made a poor decision to exit. Just wanted to be clear on those. And thank you for your feedback. I'm glad you're able to talk to MDM this evening. That's helpful.
Mr. Chair, I would just add one point to Mr. Black, and that is that, you know, whether to perform a road safety audit ought not to rely on whether there's funding available to pay for the improvements that are recommended. And it is potential that within the period of time that this project is being developed, that this intersection could pop back onto the list. That list gets modified up and down all the time. So it seems to me a commitment to perform an RSA having been made ought to remain in place. Separate question is what to do with the recommendations that come from it and whether there's funding available to pay for the recommended improvements. But we ought certainly to take the opportunity to evaluate as much as we can all of the opportunities for improvements for safety at this intersection.
Thank you, Mr. Corcoran. Appreciate your comments. Ned, do you intend to offer any additional evidence at a subsequent hearing on this particular application?
My understanding is that the hearing currently is planned to close on the 31st unless the board and the applicant agree to a further extension.
That's my understanding as well.
It may be that coming out of tonight, we'll have some additional minor comments that we might want to address. I think what we've done tonight is highlight our major concerns. I've been saying from day one that there's too much going on this site proximate to a very dangerous intersection. It's a crazy intersection. I know how people drive through that intersection, in and out of Amor Road, onto and off of Brush Hill Road and Truman Highway, and I just think there's too much. And things have been moved around. You know, I spoke early on about safe play area for kids. because the original site plans had no safe play area for kids. We've created a nice one. I think it is an improvement, but you know, when you push the balloon, things pop out the other side. And so I think the issue of safe access and egress has been exacerbated as a result of making that improvement. It just comes to the end of our concerns that there's too much going on. And I have spoken to Mr. Schomer about some level of density reduction that I think would be appropriate, that I think would work at the site. Don't know would ever be acceptable to my clients who would like to see what's there remain. But we're all realistic that there's a project here. I just do think that you know, safety and the concerns that arise from safety associated with the density are so significant that the applicant ought to take a really hard look at what they're proposing here. That's my commentary, and I appreciate the time.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ted. We appreciate that. Mr. Schomer, we have till the 31st to conclude hearings here. My guess is we'll talk with Crystal Rich and regarding availability, but I think we'll be going over to probably the 24th, which is a couple of weeks away. Crystal, what's the next available date for us?
So I have the 31st, and then I have September 21st.
Well, yeah, we have to conclude, but unless there's another agreement between the parties, we have to complete this hearing by the end of this month on the 31st.
Okay.
So
the 24th is available.
Okay.
Wednesday, the 24th.
Great. Mr. Schomer, what's your viewpoint on continuing this till the 24th with an aim towards completing the evidence on the 24th?
And I should just say, Mr. Chairman, I'm not available on the 24th. I've been holding the 31st as our next meeting, but I've been doing the same. Yeah. And now the 24th. I could do the 23rd or 25th, but not the 24th.
So the 23rd is available if you want to do the 23rd.
Crystal, is the 31st not available?
Nope, it is available.
Would you prefer the 31st, Mr. Schomer?
I would personally, just because we've been holding that evening, and it sounds like Mr. Connolly has as well.
Mr. Chairman, was your point that you're trying to get an additional meeting in, or are you just scheduling our I think part of what maybe I'm sensing is we're trying to figure out, are we really close enough to wrap up with one more meeting?
Well, we have to wrap up with one more meeting. The evidence on the present stipulation has to end on the 31st. So the question is, if we go over to the last day, the 31st, I'm content doing that if that's convenient to Mr. Schomer and his client and to Mr. Corcoran. I don't see substantial evidence coming in, but the parties may have additional revisions to plans or want to update memoranda or whatever. And I see Tim's hand is up. We'll get to him in 2 seconds. So I would think if it went over to the 31st, it would not be as lengthy a hearing as we had this evening. But it is the last day, and that's a consideration. Tim, do you want to be heard on the continuation date?
I had some other comments about the traffic testimony, but I can wait until you're done with the scheduling portion.
Well, no, let's. Okay, well, why don't we do this? Are you available on the 31st, Tim? And the municipality available on the 31st?
I am always available, Mr. Chair.
That's what I was afraid you were going to say. I'm sorry. I'm happy in one sense to hear that, but I'm personally a little bit disappointed, but let's do this. And it seems like the consensus of everyone is to continue the hearing to the 31st and to make any submittals or amendments to evidence or revised plans or supplemental memoranda available, hopefully 4 or 5 days before the 31st, so the board members can review it and review the testimony as a whole. Is everyone generally agreeable with that? Mr. Schomer, are you on board with that?
I am, Mr. Chair. Yes.
Okay, Mr. Corcoran, are you on board for continuing it over to the 31st?
Yes, I am. My understanding is that there's no intent for movement on the density, and I'm not sure. We've beaten it up pretty good, so I'm not sure that there's a whole lot more testimony that will come in, and I think getting to the 31st is appropriate.
Okay, and let me just ask out there: is there anybody, Cliff or Mr. Reardon, have any issues with going over to the 31st of August?
Not for me, and Cliff is not a panelist anymore, and he just texted me, said 31st is fine for him as well.
Okay, so that sounds fine. So we'll go over to the 31st, but let me hear from Tim Zwinski on some of the safety issues that he wanted to address. So we'll have his comments on the record so that we can at least end this hearing this evening. So Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll try to be brief. I just wanted to touch on two quick things, and I wanted to remind the board, we were talking about the sort of the movement of the driveway to sort of the center of the site as opposed to the sort of the right-hand side of the site, as was in the original application. I just want to remind folks that the amenity area is a byproduct of that move and not the purpose of that move. That move occurred as a result of feedback, input, and consultation with the fire chief about the plans for emergency access. You'll recall that the original application had a secondary access actually out to Brush Hill Road. And there was debate about whether that would be gated access or some type of a kind of forced turn or whatever. And I think we all sort of came to the determination that we didn't want a driveway opening of any kind onto Brush Hill Road, even if it was only for emergency access. I think for all of the safety reasons that we're talking about here, we didn't want to have the opportunity for anyone to be entering or exiting the site onto Brush Hill Road. And so the solution to that was to create this sort of center driveway access, which the purpose being it allows for a sort of a very minimal amount of space that a fire truck or an emergency apparatus would need to back up in the parking lot in order to exit the site, which, we worked on that with Chief Madden. I think his final comments, I can't speak for him, but I think what his final comments will say is that that's an acceptable condition for the fire department. But I think it just underscores that, although the amenity area is important and it was something that's been discussed quite a bit, it wasn't the driving force. The driving force was really another type of traffic safety concern. And I think it just underscores the sort of the toughness of the site, in that, it is, Brush Hill Road, Truman Park over there, everyone recognizes, although maybe the stats aren't kind of formally there, we all know it's a very difficult and kind of harrowing experience, turning on and off of that road. And I guess my second comment is kind of incidental to Mr. Black's testimony and the some of the commentary around the traffic safety. It's the problem is the DCR road. If this project never gets built, that is a dangerous intersection for the people that live at 16 Amore Road today. It was a dangerous intersection for them yesterday. It's a dangerous intersection for all the residents of Amore Road and all of the people that live and drive through Milton. It's a common issue in town. Blue Hills Parkway, Blue Hill Avenue, Route 128 or Route 28, excuse me. These are the most dangerous roads in our town. And so regardless of whether this project gets built or whatever form it takes, the fundamental issue is not the project. The fundamental issue is we've got an extremely dangerous roadway going through Milton. And so I think I don't have any other point except to just underscore that these are conditions that are existing, but will hopefully, change in the future if DCR kind of recognizes the fact that it's the steward of a very dangerous roadway and actually kind of commits itself to making the changes that are necessary to make a safe circulation system in our town. But it puts the board in a very tough position because I don't necessarily disagree with any of the safety considerations that have been brought up. I think that, the board and its peer reviewers and, with the help of town staff and the applicant need to come up with some really good conditions and some really good, proposals to make this as safe a site as possible. But, again, it's unsafe because of the DCR roadway, and the board needs to balance that with what are the obligations to approve and to promote housing growth in the town of Milton, which is a regional and statewide concern. So, these are not kind of, I'm not trying to point anyone in any different direction because I do think it's a very difficult decision and it's a very difficult set of facts to have to weigh. But I always want to, whenever I have a platform to do it, I want to remind people that these roadways going through our town, operated by the state, are a big problem. And as a town, we have a limited kind of capacity to fix them, but I think we need to pull every lever that we can to do that. So that's all I've got for now.
Great, thanks, Tim. I appreciate your comments and your words of wisdom. So let me see. I will propose that we continue this hearing over to August 31, which is a Wednesday at
Here,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I noticed Mr. Tamposi has had his hand raised for a while.
Oh, I haven't. Yes, it is. Sorry, Mr. Tamposi, I didn't. Actually, when I look at your viewpoint here, your hand looks like it's part of a flower that's here right behind you, and I thought it was the bloom on the flower and not your hand. Go ahead. We're delighted to hear from you.
Sure. I just wanted to make a brief comment. I agree with Tim's comments regarding looking at the obligations of this particular project versus what are issues that are pre-existing townwide issues. And then secondly, I also just want to be careful about, making sure that we're actually looking at the data with respect to this intersection. So MDM's traffic report that was originally submitted with the project shows the Mass DOT crash data from 2014 to 2020, and it lists the number of crashes reported each year. So that data is available. It's in the public record, but it's, important to note that in 2018, 2019, and 2020, the three most recent years of that data set, there was one crash reported at this intersection. So obviously it's an awkward intersection, and I don't want anyone to get the idea that anyone on this call doesn't consider road safety a priority. However, we also have to base what we do and the decisions that we make on the data that's available. So there are 14,000 vehicles that use this intersection every day. In the past 3 years, 2020, 2019, 2018, there was one vehicle crash at this location. Okay. So that's all I just wanted to add, and that data is available in MDM's traffic report.
Great, and we'll review that certainly before the next hearing.
Mr. Chairman, before we adjourn, can I take everything that Tim and Mr. Tamposi said, but I think the point is we're not saying you created the intersection, but the intersection's a factor in how your driveway is going to work. And, there haven't been accidents in the past, but there haven't been 16 units X feet from the intersection until now. So does that work? right? We have to think about how your project works with this broken intersection. And I guess I'm wondering, I don't know, Sean, I think it's the Tetra Tech discipline, right? That could think about this. Could we get feedback on David Black's letter for the board?
Certainly.
Right. I mean, we've got his testimony that it's dangerous and could be, or maybe I shouldn't say dangerous, David. You didn't say that, but you've got concerns, and be great to have something advising the board, from its own consultant on its sort of assessment that we could rely on when making the conclusion.
Certainly, and not to belabor our point, the discussion. It's about balancing objectives, right?
Yeah.
Safety exists on many levels.
Right.
There's traffic safety, there's pedestrian safety, there's children's safety, there's fire safety. So it's a matter of balancing what's ideal versus what's appropriate. And to Ned's point, when you push on one area, some area other comes out. So if we provide more parking, then we lose some buffer zone for the neighbors. So it's about balancing. And I think if we go back and look at the plan that was originally submitted and compare it to the plan that's currently in front of you, I think it's going to be obvious, how much the project has evolved and how much better it's gotten.
Yeah.
There's still going to be concerns, but I think we've balanced those in a good way.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's no doubt that, we have made the project safer through this review process, right? We addressed, for example, the fire department's concerns. We've eliminated the access onto Brush Hill Road, but have we made it safe enough? That's the question, right? Or have we just made it safe, period, right? And it's definitely improved. And I'm not one who's saying we aspire for perfection in safety, right? Like you said, these are balancing tests, but it'd be helpful just to it'd be helpful to have our own consultant give us some advice on where we're landing now on this.
Absolutely.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. I think that's an excellent suggestion, and I think it's certainly warranted. And thanks to Mr. Reardon for offering to give us his final comments on the issue of safety. Go ahead.
I can ask one quick question. I checked today to look for John Chessia's and David Black's letter on the website, and I didn't find it. Do you know if that's been posted yet?
I don't know. I had them emailed to me, but I don't know. If
submitted last week. We don't know whether it got posted.
I assume it has been, but on the other hand, I certainly can. Sean, I have copies of it right here. I can.
Yeah, if someone could just forward it to me, or I'll reach out to Tim tomorrow. I'll make sure I get a copy of it.
Okay, Tim certainly has them.
Yeah,
and,
I'll do that.
That would be.
Tim was on vacation last week, and there may have been a detail that got missed.
Yeah, I think he was on vacation, and he's.
We'll double check on that first thing in the morning.
Okay.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Tim. So, Mr. Schomer and Mr. Corcoran, unless you have something further to add, we're going to adjourn this hearing till August 31st, which is a Wednesday at 7:30 p.m. and would ask that anybody who wants to submit any additional or supplemental materials to that 4 or 5 days before the hearing so that the board can review it and be adequately prepared for the next hearing.
Mr. Chair, you just said 7:30. All of the other hearings have been at 7. Is that a
I'm sorry.
A time change you're proposing?
No, it isn't. No, in fact, I would prefer something much easier than 7 o'clock to be frank about it. Thank you for picking up on that. No, at 7 o'clock, 7 o'clock on the 31st. Everyone in agreement with that?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And with that, I want to thank everybody for your patience. It's been a long hearing tonight. It's 9:45, and I want to thank the experts for being very, very well prepared and very articulate, and for filing reports that are really helpful to the board. So see you on the 31st at 7 p.m. and we will conclude the evidence in this hearing at that particular time. So have a good night, everyone, and thank you for your patience and your professional performances. Good night,
everybody.
Thank you.
See all of you.